This session is now recording, and welcome to the webinar Wednesday. So today's session is a fantastic chance for folks to learn a little bit more about how to build up their connections within their own regions through counselors. The session itself is going to take about, we're going to aim for about 30 to 40 minutes of slides and information that we'll be sharing with you. Following that time, we will take about 15-20 minutes to answer some group questions. So I'm sure you'll have some questions that come up as we go along. Please don't hesitate to jot those down, and then we'll have some time at the end to take your questions. We'll also pause and have some poll questions, some interaction throughout. If you've ever participated in an International ACAC webinar, you know they're a lot of fun, and this is no different today. So to get things started, we've got a fantastic panel, and we're going to introduce the panel right now. So again, my name is Aaron Anderson. I'll simply be your moderator as we move through the slides here today. But let each of the panelists, we can all wave, introduce themselves, and go right ahead.
Hi, good morning where I am at 6 a.m. in Phuket, Thailand. And I'm Dale Ford, working at the British International School of Phuket. I moved here this year after 17 years at the Singapore American School and 9 years in Kobe, Japan at the Canadian Academy. So I'm currently working in an office with 2 counselors. In Singapore, there were 10, and in Japan, there was 1. So that's my story.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Hawkins. It is 3 minutes past midnight here at Taunton in the southwest of England. I am an independent counsellor working with students and families across the UK. Prior to that, I was the head of college counselling at the International School of Brussels, which was a 3-person department. And before moving to Brussels, I was the sole counsellor as well as a history teacher at a British national school. So like Dale, I've experienced this work in a number of different settings.
So before Dale gives us a bit of introduction of what we're going to be hearing today, I think, why don't we, what do you think, panelists? Should we learn a little more about who's joining us today?
I think first we should have Ray introduce himself.
Oh my gosh, Ray. David, I'm just so excited about you. To me, that what you said, David, just is that you don't need to hear anything else. But Ray, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Ray Marks here, and it's 6 o'clock in Quito, Ecuador. And again, I've been working at the American School of Quito in Quito, Ecuador for 18 years now. This is the only setting that I've been involved with, and I work in a 2-person office, and it's great to be here. I did not make it for the first session. My internet went out, so I'm hoping that my internet sticks with me through the remainder of this session.
Fabulous. Any other panelists that want to introduce themselves? No, it looks like we're all counted for. So let's get a sense of who is joining us. We've got a large group of folks from all over the world, and let's learn a little bit of what regions of the world are represented right now with our group. So here is our first poll. Tell us where you're joining us from. So feel free now just to click through there. Looks like some people are maybe checking their maps of the world. Some people are not quite sure, right? It is a good question. South America, North America, where's Mexico, for example? That's where it looks like there's. All right, so people have considered, looked at the map. We're going to close the poll now. And as one might expect with the time zones, we have a very good representation up and down the Western Hemisphere in North America and South America, and some parts of Europe and Asia are probably still sleeping. And another question always is good to ask is, what is your current role? So certainly this session today is focused a lot on counselors, but I know there's probably some of the university representatives and independent counselors that are joining us here too. So let's find out what part of your responsibilities are. Here we see some people probably checking their business cards, perhaps trying to determine exactly what their role is and how it fits into these little boxes we've created and ticking the boxes off. All right. Looks like most people have responded. And there we have it. So it's good to see us. With a large number of representatives from North America, we've got a healthy representation of university representatives, high school counselors. So fantastic group here. And I'm sure the panelists will certainly take that into account as we talk today and share our information. So I'll hand it over to you, Dale, to talk a little more about what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay, thanks, Aaron, and thanks for all you folks for staying up and giving up your wine at the beach to listen to us speak. Yes, today's topic, of course, is about collaboration, working and getting to know other counselors in your region or your city or in similar schools so that you can do a better job at what you're doing. You know, there are large numbers of international ACA counselors who are working in smaller schools where they may be the only show in town. They may be the only counselor in the region. And it can be a pretty lonely feeling out there when it's just you and nobody to talk to. You know, the hallmark of the original summer conferences, and continues to be the hallmark, is the networking that happens there. Getting to know other people, sitting around while some crazy people are playing volleyball, and asking a question. How do you do this? Or what do you do this? Or how do you do this? And when I first went to my original international ACA called Overseas ACAC, there were 25 or 30 people there. Well, that's changed a bit, but what hasn't changed is people working together and learning from each other. Aaron, could we move the next slide, please? So rarely do you have to reinvent the wheel. International counselors always give advice, and I find the same thing with university admission officers. You know, what do you do for this place, or how do you do this? If you were a counselor and you have just, for example, started using Naviance or BridgeU or one of the other online portals, while those systems have their own help menus, it's a lot more efficient to find a counselor who's basically going through the same thing you are and asking them, how did you do this? Or if you need a PowerPoint for a parent program, rather than starting from scratch, especially if you're a newer counselor, all you have to do is speak to somebody else who's already done it, and they will share it with you so that you can start with that. In fact, if you take all of the international schools' college guides, most of us have a written or online guide of getting into college, and you were to take all of them and put them into Turnitin.com, you would probably find that most of them have very similar information. In fact, word for word information. Because when I first wrote mine, I remember borrowing pretty heavily from an unnamed school or two. And I know that people who are writing theirs now probably borrow from the one I have done. That's perfectly fine. That's not cheating. That's being smart. Different than if your kids are writing an English essay, perhaps, or a college admission essay. So how do we all develop a network? How do we get started with this? I'm reminded of when I was a young man, probably as young as Aaron or younger, when I had arrived in Kobe, Japan, and I was following a person who frankly wasn't a very good counselor at that school, and I really didn't know where to get started. But I had heard of this guy's name. I didn't know him very well. I didn't know him at all, actually, but his name was Peter Howitt. And at the time, he was working at St. Mary's International School in Tokyo. And so I had the courage to pick up the phone because email hadn't been invented yet. We did have the fax machine because it was, you know, yeah. And so called Peter and said, hi, I'm Dale and I'm in Kobe. And last year, I think we only had 2 university reps come to our school. What could I do to get more people to come? Well, Peter had all kinds of ideas, but most importantly, he said, you know, when they come to my school, I will mention to them that they could hop on the bullet train and go down to your school in about 3 hours, and that would all work out great. Well, needless to say, Peter has become a person that most of us know at this point. In fact, International ACAC named an award after him, partly because of his willingness to give to others. So if you want some advice from somebody, ask for it. In every region, there's the old guard. There's Ray Marks, the old guard in South America. There's Jane Lowry, who's currently in the Middle East. There's young people like me in Asia. So send them an email, say, hi, I'd like to pick up the phone and give you a call, and get working with them. You can also find ways to collaborate through the International ACAC Facebook page, which we'll be talking about later. If you haven't gone, you really should go to the summer conference. And you can just look at friends of friends of friends, people that you know or have met. After last night's webinar, last night my time, I had a couple emails from people saying, well, you said this, could you share that with me? And certainly I will. So that's kind of what the whole collaboration idea is about. And let's pass this on to Ray to talk about some online options.
All right, thanks, Dale. And as Dale mentioned, I guess I'm the old guard now in Quito or in South America. 18 years, again in Quito, Ecuador. So I've been here a while. I'm going to talk about the three things on your screen, the three different kinds of online options for collaboration that we came up with. The first being the informal email group, the second being the Naviance peer sharing option for scattergrams, and then the third, talk a little bit about a closed Facebook group. So we'll start with the first one, a sort of informal email group, and this is the system that we use here in Quito. We probably have 12 counselors or schools that we regularly email with and tap into for information. Various things we'll do through those email groups. So we'll announce college fairs. Say there's a college fair coming up at Colegio Americano next Wednesday. Please don't forget. Let me know how many students are coming, etc. We might announce a college fair at a local hotel. Please don't forget that this Saturday night at the Marriott, this is happening. So again, those kind of purposes. Or, for example, this weekend we have 3 colleges in town, and they're all offering interviews for our students. So again, might send out a reminder to all the group and say, please, remember to tell your students to sign up for those interviews. So that's sort of how the email group works. And again, there's always questions among the group that if people don't want to reach out to the international Facebook page, or they don't want to contact, they know they can just write a quick email, copy all of us, and they'll have information that they need pretty quickly. I guess, one disadvantage of an email thread, they can get messy if you have lots of threads going on, but if you can have somebody that kind of controls that, certainly makes your life a lot easier. The second type that we identified here was the Naviance peer sharing option for scattergrams. I'll assume most people in the audience are familiar with Naviance, but again, if you're not, just a quick overview. It's sort of just a database for students keeping track of college admissions and grades and test scores, etc. And one really neat feature that Naviance offers is the ability to peer share the scattergrams. And again, the scattergrams are basically looking at GPAs and SAT scores or test scores and trying to figure out, where's the area where students are getting in, where they're not getting in based on those variables. And as a school, you have the option to be able to share your scattergrams with other schools. Again, you could do this locally within your own city. You could do it regionally. You could do it across countries. The big advantage of this would be the fact that you'd have just access to a lot more data. So if I'm a school and I'm a small school and I don't have a lot of history of applications to a certain university, all of a sudden I share with a bunch of other schools and history from my area. And I can see how students from other schools are doing. Are they getting into that school or not? A couple of caveats that you should know about the Naviance option. Obviously, everybody has to have Naviance. All the different schools, they would have to have that in common. You also have to sort of look for similar types of schools. Maybe one school's an IB school, another school's an AP school. So again, you're trying to look for schools with similar student populations as yours. I think that would make the data more interesting, a little more accurate. And finally, in the Naviance system, you all have to sort of come up with and agree with a grading scale. So that can be used. You can use those scattergrams to see information accurately. But if you can do all that, it's a wonderful tool to be able to use. I had a conversation just the other day with a counselor in Asia who shares with 18 different schools. At his school, they never had a student get into University X and they couldn't figure out why. So the person was looking at all the data from the 18 different schools and realized that some of the only students getting in from those schools were the students that applied early. In this case, early decision to a school. And so sure enough, you had a student apply early decision this year. The student decided to, and they got in. And so a clear example of how that can work to your benefit, sharing scattergrams in Naviance. The last one is the closed Facebook group. Again, I do not do this in Quito, but I know that's something that David's going to talk a little bit more extensively about now. So I'll pass it on to David.
Thanks, Ray. Yes, so you can see on the slide now in front of you, this is a screenshot of a page set up by me and Anna Wright of TASIS just near London, for offering advice and support to people based at schools in the UK who advise students who are applying to America. And this has been a very powerful tool and something which is a great adjunct to the bigger Facebook closed groups, such as the International ACAC one, something very tailored and specific to the needs of our particular region. Particularly when you're dealing with situations where either your group is geographically quite difficult to get together, so it may not be possible to have face-to-face meetings, or in the case of the UK, where actually most national schools, whoever is doing the US college counselling is probably also teaching quite a significant load and isn't able to be released from class. So Anna and I have been running this Facebook group, and it's really helpful for people to ask questions which they have no one else within any kind of decent radius of them who can answer these questions. The membership is relatively small and it's quite specialized, but it's really helpful for small things that are very specific to our particular culture. And I know there are similar groups running in communities around the world of counsellors. I think one of the really important things with this is you end up with a great educational tool as well of people who are new to this profession, particularly those from national schools rather than international schools, and they're able to be mentored by those of us who have a little bit more experience and studying the resources to answer questions. And it's very easy to set up a closed Facebook group, and it's something I would very much encourage people to do. For those who are not able to actually do a face-to-face visit, which is, I think, what Dale is now going to talk about.
David, I was going to ask, with this small group, the Facebook group, in your example, do you have university admission representatives as part of the group?
We have a very small handful of university admissions people, generally people who are regular visitors to the UK. So these are people who may be making 2 or 3 extensive visits, traveling around all the schools. It also tends to actually be people who have a British background who are working in US admissions, so they can answer those specific questions. And that has actually been quite helpful at times.
But of course, depending on the geography, face-to-face visit is always a good thing. When I was in Singapore a few years ago, one of the counselors at one of the international schools decided to organize a meeting for the counselors at her school, and that's how it started. It was just a person who said, you know, we should get together. So it was 4 o'clock one Wednesday afternoon, invited the people from all of the different international schools, and this little group developed. That could also be done at a restaurant or a bar or wherever else. But we had a kind of a loose agenda, and then it would rotate to another school for the next session. So we did it twice a year. And it was basically only counselors on purpose. We didn't have, I think we would have had any local university representatives that wanted to come, but we didn't have any agents or things like that, or test prep people. It was our own little group, and we could be really honest about what was going on in our community. So the thing is, if you want to do something like this, you can't wait for somebody else to organize it. You need to do it. Now, again, that won't work if you're in Africa, where maybe there is nobody nearby. But in many of the larger cities, there are 2 or 3 or 4 international schools, and getting the people together can pay big dividends related to organizing college rep visits and things like that. So I would strongly encourage you to do it. Again, I think a couple of times a year is probably enough. Counselors tend to be pretty busy, and so if you start to schedule too many of them, I think you'll find a point of diminishing returns. Perhaps one in August, September, the beginning of the school year, so that if there are any new counselors, you can see who they are and get to know them a bit. So that's kind of how I would suggest a face-to-face visit. And again, encouraging rep visits is one of the things that can be done there. And I'll turn this over to Ray to talk about that.
Okay. Great, thanks, Dale. So the next slide we have here, encourage rep visits. And so I guess this is sort of the meat and potatoes of my part of the presentation, because this is something that we've done, I guess, quite well in Quito. Again, as I mentioned, we probably get 250 plus university visits a year in Quito. Again, that's large group fairs, that's small group travel, individual visits. So it's a real mix from all over the world. And I say this keeping in mind that at my school, we probably send 75 students a year abroad. And in all of Quito, you're probably looking at 140 a year for all the schools. So that's a lot of schools for the students in the Quito area. So we feel obviously certainly blessed in that sense to have a wide mix. I'm not sure how the universities feel about it. I think at some point we're getting a lot more visits each year, and I think it's something we're starting to wrestle with, and I'll talk about that in a second. So what do we do to really encourage the rep visits? Well, the first thing is we sort of have created this system, and again, it was started by Marie Vivas, so I should give out credit to Marie Vivas, but it was her idea a long time ago to sort of use Quito as have one person in Quito, sort of organize all the visits when the colleges come down. So that torch has been passed to me. And so basically what I do is anytime a university contacts me, or if the university contacts somebody else, another school in Quito, they basically say, okay, we'll contact Ray Marks, just talk to him and he'll organize the visit for you. And so what this entails is the universities will reach out to me. I'll send them an initial document that'll have everything from how to get from the airport to your hotel, what are the certain hotels you should probably think about staying in, what are some things to do in the area, things like that. And then also contacts for all of the college counselors in the area so they can reach out individually if they want to. And then apart from that, we offer a driver service. And so the driver service works where we have the same driver I've been using for 18 years. He has his cadre of drivers that he also assigns out. And the driver picks them up at the hotel, takes them to each school visit. We have it calculated perfectly with traffic. And so the reps come to Quito with a really efficient visit. In 2 days, they can easily see 8 schools. There's really no hassles. We've been doing this again for 18 years without, knock on wood, without any incident or problems. And I think one of the keys to that is really, if you're going to do something like that, is to have great drivers. So the driver we have, he is requested by name. Every time the universities come down, they say, can you get me Rafael? Can you get me Rafael? And so it's really worked out well. And so we arrange the whole visit A to Z. And again, so obviously university reps, they love that. I mean, anybody that doesn't have to spend more time worrying about logistics and instead can focus on the actual school visit, the actual meeting of the students, I think it helps them, and it sort of leaves a better impression of their time in Quito. So that is one of the reasons we're getting so many visits and why we continue to get more visits. So if I had to look at any of the drawbacks of this process, the first one, I guess, is kind of obvious. It's a lot of work. This has become really a full-time job almost for me. August, September are just crazy. I spend a lot of time just planning. And again, it's planning out the visits to my school and every other school in Quito for usually a 2-day period. So a lot of work. But if somebody out there wants to take that on and organize that in your region, I would say go for it. It's a great idea. Other drawbacks could be with all the visits we're getting, so there's some missed class time that's happening now for students. So that's becoming a little bit of an issue, not just at my school, but I know some of the other schools as well, with the teachers and administrators and worrying about all of these visits that we're getting. And then the last, maybe perhaps drawback, I don't know, for the universities, could be some burnout on the kids' part. When you're getting 250 universities and you have 75 kids from my school, students that are applying, a lot of them are going to these same visits over and over. So they're seeing a lot of them. And so it's a kind of an interesting position to be in. But again, fortunately, we have a wonderful administration that's very supportive. They get it. And so they continue to give me the green light to organize this stuff and the time to organize it. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to back to David again for some info on Europe.
Great, thanks, Ray. So I'm going to just talk through now 3 specific examples of how this collaboration can actually work in order to encourage rep visits, particularly using technology to connect people. The question we had earlier in the previous session we did is sort of the purpose behind doing this, and I think that there are 2 to putting the effort in. I think those of us who have been fortunate enough to work in schools where you do have a lot of colleagues, you are very well resourced. I think we have an obligation almost to serve the communities around us and to put some of that time into building opportunities for other students. But equally, I think there is a slightly selfish element to it as well, in that the more universities you can encourage to visit your school, the better. And the key way of doing that is to increase the number of students they might meet. So by bringing other schools, whether that's other international schools or particularly local schools, into councillor collaboration communities is enabling the universities to see more students, and therefore you're more likely to get repeated visits from universities to the benefit of your own school community. So the three examples we have now are starting sort of from a regional level and delving down. And this in front of you now is a website that I set up during my time at Brussels, just hosted by the school on a Google Sites thing. And this was bringing together councillors at international schools based around Northwest Europe. And it had two components to it, both of which were I felt quite successful. The first one, and the one which I thought was very powerful, was the Google map that you see in front of you. And it wasn't a huge amount of work to just populate a Google map and then embed it into this website, just showing literally on the map where international schools were in relation to each other across Europe, so that any university rep who was given this web link could quite easily see, oh, I can understand now how many visits might be possible. For schools that had a bit more time and were determined to do a little bit more than this, down the left of this page were links to specific web pages for international schools. And on those pages were the links to the high school profile, contact details for each counsellor, potted profiles of the schools, so where they would tend to send their students to US, UK, Canada, for example, the number of students in the class, and information like that. It was, from my point of view, very light touch to do in terms of technology. I could give access rights to each page to a counsellor at a different school. They could input their own information and go from there. And then all I had to do to mean it was easy for universities to find was set up a link through a thing called Bitly. And I think the link is something like bit.ly/Northwest High School visits. So to encourage people to come to visit our region and just to get a sense of the possibilities that were out there, this was a really good starting point. On the next slide, we have an example from our colleague Asım Nogman, who, because it's sort of 2 or 3 in the morning in Turkey, hasn't been able to join us for this session, but she talked through earlier. And this is more of a national sense, how, once you've got people to come to your region, how do you make it easier for them to travel within the country? And she's here talking about opportunities within Turkey, and particularly with Istanbul, where her school is based, and quite a difficult city to traverse, particular travel issues between the two different parts of the city. And she has been doing this for many years. She was telling us earlier about originally having inputted this data onto CDs that she would then give out at events, and now it's on via email and PDFs and situations like this. But again, a nice, easy way, particularly when attending conferences and events, to transmit information about the opportunities within a country as to slightly more granular information, maps, car services, how to deal with the airport, how to apply for your visa, particular to a country that someone might be looking to visit. And on the final slide, really delving down to
David, can I just jump in here? I just want to say how much that helps on a university side, in that even if something like this, for the counselors that are listening today, even if something adding like a little line like this as a signature to the bottom of an email when colleges are contacting you, that right away is a big help, and it can be something as simple as that can really help universities connect and better understand your region. So thank you for the counselors that are taking the time to do this.
Thanks, Aaron. So then on a city-by-city level, this is an example of a program I put together with the help of colleagues at other international schools in Brussels, which was similar to what Ray was talking about here, but just trying to put real flesh on the bones of this, an actual scheduled program that any university could arrange to do. So through negotiation with councillors at 3 or 4 schools around Brussels, we put together an agreed program running on particular days of the week. And this was produced just on a page of A4, printed out. Anyone attending a conference on a stand, on an email as a PDF, could send this out, so that it was almost pre-agreed what our sequence would be. And this was really powerful, particularly their opportunities to meet the Scandinavian School of Brussels, which was a community that was at the start quite separate from the rest of us international sector. But we all had students who were looking at the Scandinavian universities, and as a result of them becoming part of this, we started to pick up ourselves visits to our school, the International School of Brussels, from universities in Norway, Denmark, Sweden, etc., which benefited our students. So by leveraging our own expertise and bringing everyone together in a program which made it very easy for reps to see they could fly in and out of Brussels, be in for 24 hours, see a number of students and just follow the program. This was a very powerful thing, and it was quite a lot of work amongst everyone to agree their slot. No one had their ideal slot, but everyone was able to make little compromises for it to work, and it became a really straightforward process, and one I hope is continuing after my departure from Brussels. So that's sort of the end of this kind of sense of the collaboration, but there's another element we haven't quite touched on yet, which is use of data, and I'm going to pass back to Dale for that.
Okay, thank you, David. You know, I have one other thought about that. When you do all this work to put this information together, you have to make it easy for a university rep to be able to find it. So you need to make sure that your website, for example, has a clearly identifiable area that university reps can go to get this, to find the link. You know, if you haven't done it before, search for your own information on your website and pretend you're a university rep. How easy would it be to schedule a visit at my school if I didn't know anything about it? And I think you'll be surprised that for some schools, it's pretty darn hard to even find a counselor's name. So if you can get this information and that put together somewhere easily accessible, that would be great. But on to another area, which is comparing counseling office data. You know, a lot of us work kind of in isolation. And in addition to our work with our students, we also need to make sure we get an office that runs as smoothly as possible. Just yesterday, 2 days ago, the principal of my school came in and said, I'd like to talk about the idea of doing away with valedictorian and moving to some other kind of method of recognizing a top student at the end of the school year. And so I have been, of course, for a while involved in a Asian counselor sort of email group. And just a few months ago, another counselor in the region had asked the same question. So I was able to look really, really smart by doing no real work, by just going to that information and saying, well, you know, in this region, there are X number of schools who do a valedictorian, there are Y number of schools who do something else. Here are some potential ideas we have for making this a better system. Within the kind of Asian group, we have a Google Doc that I think maybe Sherry Neal originally made, or I made, or somebody made, which contains a lot of information about the schools in this region in terms of their office and how their office runs. For example, the total number of students and counselors to come up with a student to counselor ratio, how many counselor reps maybe come to campus each year so that you can see how you compare to the other schools in the region. Are admissions reps not coming, or are they coming a lot? And then you can figure out why that might be. Things like conference funding. You know, does Shanghai have a lot more professional development budget than maybe Singapore or Jakarta? Now, the advantage of doing that, of course, is to just get some information about, really, that's what you do. But the other advantage is you can then go to your administration and say, oh, did you know that all the other schools in the region, of all of the other schools, we have the worst counselor to student ratio out there? Principals don't like to be the bottom of the pile. Principals like to think they have one of the best schools out there. So you can use this data strategically to help move your office forward. And I would really suggest that you come up with some way of collaborating with like schools or regional schools to learn about other things. Policies, for example. There are some schools in Asia that have an application limit of 10, for example. Not every school does that. Before you implement a new idea, it's good to see what your peer schools are doing, because once again, as people complain about it, you can say, well, we're just really doing what everyone else is doing. This is common. This is what's happening in the profession, and so that's why we're doing it. Pay, you know, per diem rates. Do you have to work an extra week or two at the end or beginning of the school year, and do you get paid for that? Good to know what the other schools in the region are doing. So there's a lot of information that you can choose to share among different schools. At the last session, I talked about how I was asked a few years ago, to give a board presentation about success at the end of the school year for our office and our students. And so Sean McElroy had done the same kind of thing, and that's kind of private information, but because we had a trusting relationship, we were able to sort of show each other what they do, what we did and what they did. And so that gave us more information and more ideas about what we might want to say. So I really would encourage you to find ways to share with counselors with different kinds of things that are going on in your office. All right. So moving on, we're going to talk about other kinds of counselor sharing, and that goes on to Ray.
Okay, yeah, to share or not to share, I guess that is the question. Fortunately, we work in a profession that's very caring and sharing. And so most people are willing to share, and that's great. But again, as Dale alluded to earlier, there's a wealth of information that's already out there being shared all the time on a daily basis. And so, you know, if you happen to work in a place where people don't want to share, again, some of the resources we talked about, the NACAC e-list has some great information on there. The International ACAC Facebook page is a great resource. I mean, I'm constantly learning stuff on there and getting people's advice. Also, as Dale mentioned, websites for certain high schools out there. They have some great websites with some great information that you can tap into. Dale, I actually happen to use your information before on our current website at my school, so thank you for that. But again, it's all out there, and people are sharing it. Another thing I thought of while I was sitting here was even going to conferences. You know, sometimes in Quito, for example, not every school sends their counselors to the different conferences. Again, I work in a school. I'm pretty blessed in the sense that we have a lot of professional development, so we can go to a lot of the conferences. But there are instances where you can go to a conference and you can come back and you can easily share some of that information that you might have learned at a conference. A good anecdote about that was just last year at the CIS forum in Barcelona. I was there. I went to a session on public universities in Spain, and that's always been an issue in Quito. We have a lot of students who have Spanish passports or applying to Spanish public universities, and we've always had a hard time sometimes figuring out exactly how to apply. So I went to a session. It was a wonderful session. Got a lot of new information, a lot of updated information that was going on in Spain. Came back and shared a lot of that with other counselors who were not at the forum in Barcelona. So again, the sharing is really already happening out there. But again, as you can see on the screen, there's plenty of other sharing that can go on. You know, student parent university guides. Maybe you have put together something over the years that's really good, and somebody wants to take a look at it or perhaps borrow some pieces from it. Again, if you have that kind of relationship, it's a wonderful thing to do. Of course, faculty presentations or parent presentations. I can think of presentations we've shared in the past in Quito on like transitions from high school to college, where people had some good ideas and they shared the information. And then of course the year-end summary reports, we always share SAT, PSAT scores among the schools in Quito, so we have a good idea what other schools are doing. So again, a lot of the sharing that's happening out there is great, and we hope it continues to be shared. Another thing, the second thing on there is the offer to review. I've had the good fortune the last 2 years to be able to work as a mentor to some of the international ACAC scholars. It's been a fantastic ride. And one of the things that always comes up, as you see on there, are looking at the school's website for some of the scholars or their school profile. And it's an interesting, sort of practice to go through and look at somebody else's profile or look at somebody else's website and see what you can come up with a pair of fresh eyes. So offering to help out other new counselors in the area that might need some help in those particular areas. The last area on there we have is protecting students. And again, where ultimately our goal is to guide students and protect them and serve them. And so you just want to make sure, I guess, that there are unscrupulous people out there. And so you want to make sure perhaps as a group you can either identify them through your group and protect your students from them. And I know in Quito recently we've had a spate of agents that have been working with some of our students, but many of the schools already offer quality college counseling. So we've had some discussion about that. And one of the things it led to from our group discussion was Sarah Loring in Mexico had produced this page about a college recruiting statement and how her school deals with agents. And she shared it again with many people on the International ACAC Facebook page. And so the group in Quito looked at that, we revised it, and each of us sort of made our own changes to that and put it on our website. So again, some concrete examples of how sharing information can help out your school. Moving on to the next slide, and I guess one of our final slides here is going to be about.
Sorry, Ray. Before we do that, I just wanted, before we talk about some of the roadblocks, any other potential challenges, I thought we have one more poll here. And I do want to, now that we've talked so much about the advantages of some of these regional networks, let's take a moment to survey the group here, and this can be even the university reps can chime in here too. If you're working with other universities, you can consider that you're already working with the regional network as well. So we've got a, oh, where does it go? Question, do you currently have a regional network you are part of? And let us know. All right, looks like people are responding there. All right, good to see. Okay, so let's see now. Share the results and see how many people are already involved. So it looks like a majority of 50 plus 1, 50% plus 2 here have not yet been able to take advantage of regional networks. So whether that's university reps that might be thinking about working with other universities, I know we've got university reps here, or of course the counselors that I'm sure are learning something here as well. We've got just about 5 more minutes before we hit the 15-minute mark to go to questions. And so let's just close off last couple of slides here, Ray, or if you want to talk on this, go right ahead.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So again, the last slide we have is about potential roadblocks. I mean, you know, we live in a competitive world, and we all know it. And oftentimes that competition, you know, brings out our A game and helps us to work better and become a better school, better counselors. So some of the competition, and again, this doesn't happen so much in my area in Quito. I don't know if we can get that slide up, Aaron. I still see the poll, but you know, let's face it. Sometimes we're in competition out there for students. I'm sure there's some counselors out there that in your city, in your area, you know, your school is fighting for the same students in that area that another high school is. So that's a real, you know, it's a real concern. Other areas, we might be fighting for college admissions, university admissions. As a high school, we know that you know, some colleges, universities maybe only take X number of students from that region. So that might happen. I've been told that does, you know, from time to time, and so you have to be, you know, concerned about that or think about that as a school. One issue I would say particular to our region in Quito would be financial aid. And there are a limited number of colleges and universities out there that offer significant aid to international students, and many of the students in Quito that are applying to universities are all competing for that same money or scholarships. And so, it's something to be sensitive about when you're thinking about sharing, so potential roadblocks. I guess the important thing to do here is really just sort of assess the landscape. You know, look around your region. Certainly, I would talk to your administration and see what their take on it is. But then if everything looks positive and your administration is behind you, then set up some sort of action plan where you can start to work together and see the positive results. So, you know, through all of this, when we talk about collaboration and sharing and some of the positive things, I think honestly, you know, sharing leads to all of us becoming better counselors on the counseling side. The more information we see, the more ideas we share with one another, the more knowledgeable we become about our profession, and the better job we can do as a counselor. Certainly, I think also sharing an argument you could use for your administration leads to perhaps a better school. So if I see, you know, that one school is similar to ours and they're getting, you know, lots of students into a certain university, why are we not? Maybe it's something to look at. Or if that school has better standardized test scores, what's going on there? We're similar kind of schools. Why are they doing better? Is it the curriculum? Is it the teachers? Is it test prep? I don't know, but it's something you could probably drill down into. And finally, obviously, one positive about collaborating is it lessens your workload. you have more resources to pull from, and so you don't have to work as hard. You can just work smarter. If I had to come up with any negatives here about sharing information, because I thought should try to come up with some. I mean, I guess you know, sharing your coveted work. There's some counselors, I'm sure, or on the university side, that you've done a lot of work over the years, and you've really honed those presentations, and you really kind of want to hold on to them, and that's understandable. But I think the other thing we already talked about, perhaps jeopardizing your school, it might affect your school whether, the number of students in your school, going to your school, etc. And the last negative I kind of came up with is you have to make sure in this collaborative nature that it's actual true sharing. Because if it's one person doing all the work and everybody else is sharing, then that's not real collaborative work, and you run the risk of having one person in that area doing all the work. So those are sort of the end of our collaboration road here. But I guess at this point, what we'll do is open it up for questions, Aaron.
We sure will. So thanks very much, all of you, and Ray and Dale and David. And I do hope that a lot of folks got a few really good tips out of this. I know it was great from university perspective to hear that. And I do have to echo, as I said earlier, how much it can help, even small things such as just sharing on a quick email some of the nearby schools. That can really go a long way. So take it in small bits and pieces. It doesn't have to be you taking on the whole bulk of the work right away. But this is the time where we are going to open up to questions. And so on your dashboard there, you should have a little question box, and you can enter that. What'll happen is I will sort through some questions here. We try to read them as quickly as I can, and then I will hand them off, or I will speak them out loud and assign them to our panelists here.
Give David the hard questions.
Okay, David, you got the hard questions. So any comment, David, maybe on collaboration? We do remember from the poll, we do have a number of independent consultants that are with us here. Any one of you want to talk a little bit about how you might have brought in independent consultants, and maybe how you perhaps, I guess more specifically, also how you maybe filter some of those, or how do you make sure that you're keeping that small group, but not but also being open as well to your colleagues?
Yeah, so I'm probably best for me to step in as an independent consultant now, having recently made the transition. But I would say, well, I'm working with two distinct groups of schools. A lot of the students I'm working with are at schools where they are the only, if maybe one of two or three students who are making a university application outside of the UK. So my role within the school is quite educational for the school as well as for the students and the family I'm working with. I was in a school earlier today, just down the road. They don't have any international university advising there, so I'm building a network between other people like them, using me as sort of the conduit between maybe 20 in sort of the 2 hours around where I work, schools that I'm visiting, giving talks, out working at, with students from. So I have a role there of building a network myself and hopefully increasing the educational output to those students. On the other hand, when you're working with schools which have very experienced counsellors who may, in many cases, as a lot of schools do, have policies about how they will deal with independent counsellors, I think there are, again, things you can do there, particularly on something I'd sent an email to Dale to overnight at his time. As an independent counsellor, I'm in a position where I have time to spend on projects that I know a lot of high school counsellors don't have the time to do so, and there were various things that I've put in place as an independent now that I wasn't able to do when I was working in school because I just didn't simply have the time. I strongly believe that I will be successful as an independent counsellor if I can serve schools well. The better relationships I have with schools, the more trusted I am by a school, the more happy they may be for their students and families to work with me. So the collaboration, I think, is a fundamentally important part of being an independent counsellor. I heard a phrase at some professional development 2 years or so ago that someone said that knowledge used to be like gold, that we used to hoard it and keep it all to ourselves. But in the 21st century, knowledge is like milk. It goes off. So we need to share it as quickly as we can. And that's something that stuck with me as I transitioned to being an independent, that what I may know now, I may be one of the few people who know, but next year I won't be. So I should share it around whilst I can.
That's great. So we've got one comment here. I'm going to jump back to a few of these slides where we talked about these things. Aaron talked about the brilliance of the Navient sharing, and I have to agree with that. I think that's a really great thing if you're a small school that may not have a small cohort. Peer sharing or the Navients, if you can convince your staff to do that, it's a really great one. And then Heather and Celicia both were asking a little bit about the small group tours and versus visit. So talking a little bit about any of you counselors, maybe Ray or Dale can comment a little bit about from your students' perspective. Do they have a preference to a university that might come as a small group or individual? Heather is specifically asking if students are more apt to consider schools that make the effort to come as an individual versus a small group or a tour.
I think you're giving students too much credit.
Yeah.
Actually, if you think that they're actually thinking that deeply into it. No, I don't think it matters at all, personally. Again, working both in Singapore and in Phuket, how you come. Certainly a large fair, if you're coming with a CIS group or a Linden group, those have a different feel because there may be 20 different people there. A small show of 1, 2, or 3, I don't think makes any difference personally. And I would just do whatever works best for you without worrying about the way it may look to students, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I think the students are pretty savvy in a sense, and then, whether it's a large fair or an individual visit, they'll, if they like the place, they'll go up, they'll ask the right questions to get the right material. I think, again, though, a lot of these visits, just like, touring a college campus and whoever the tour guide is, oftentimes I think students are prone to being susceptible to how good is the presentation. So it's a different sort of setting, obviously, when you're a big group and you have, hundreds of students milling around a desk versus when the presenter is up there by him or herself and there's students in a room engaged. So it definitely has a different feel, but as far as the students go, I don't see them necessarily having a preference.
I'd just like to step in and sort of take that slightly further. That for the university representatives on the webinar to actually use these regional groups in a slightly different way as well. That to actually say, we've been coming to your city, your region, your country for a number of years. We've had a steady stream of applicants. Do you think this is going to continue? One of the things that I've seen work quite powerfully in a face-to-face meeting was a group of councillors sit down and say, where aren't we getting visits from? Where do we have students next year? Which universities, which countries are they looking at going to? Can we reach out to these groups of universities and say, we have, say, 20 students across 5 schools who are looking at your university, will you come and visit us? And that's something I've seen quite powerfully when we went to a university and said, you've never come to our region, but if you visit our 5 schools, we will likely have applicants for you. Equally, if you're the university rep and you're thinking of crossing off a country or a city from somewhere you've come to, please do reach out to the councillors representing other councils in that region and saying, look, maybe this year was going to be the tipping point for you. And if you never ask the question, we can't go out and survey the schools that we have contacts with and say, look, so-and-so from X university is thinking of not coming this year. Do we have students who are interested so we can feed back? I think it's important this collaboration goes both ways.
One other thought, we actually discussed it at the earlier session, was about Skype conversations, which I think there's some places where that could work well. I don't think they would probably work well at schools that already get a large number of visitors. But if you're an admissions representative and you know of the counselor in Botswana or someplace that probably doesn't have any visitors, that person would probably be thrilled to have a Skype conversation, assuming the technology works, so that an admissions officer in 15 minutes can explain something about maybe liberal arts education and their particular institution. So I think you have to tailor what you're doing for the place and the region that you're going to. What worked in Singapore with 200 visitors per year is very different than what would work at maybe a small school in Cambodia where they were so excited to have their first visitors. But many university representatives, and if I may be a little too blunt, sometimes just kind of turn the tape recorder on when they get to the school and give the same presentation, whether they're the first visit or the 200th visit. And that's not usually very helpful. You do need to spend more time kind of making the presentation work for that school. If you're the 25th liberal arts college to show up, it's a different presentation than if you're the first.
So I have to say, gentlemen, and pardon it, it's only gentlemen here today. It's not often the case here at Webinar Wednesdays, but what a great panelists we have here. I have to say there's some amazing collaboration going on right now with these questions. Because Mario is mentioning to us that we have Mario is joining us from Panama, and they have a Panama counselors website, panamacounselors.weebly.com, and Mario was asking if he had a great idea if that could be shared on the International ACAC website, perhaps where we perhaps organize collaborative groups so other universities can have it all in one spot. And that leads into an amazing other segue into another point of collaboration. Wilson Lee, who is also joining us today. Wilson Lee is a part of a subcommittee that International ACAC has now created to look specifically at regional organizations. And so Wilson and the rest of the regional subcommittee is going to be connecting with the association, with all the members, to survey, to find out what type of regional arrangements we already have, and to collect exactly that type of data, Mario. And so shortly, see a survey. There'll be more announcements coming out leading up to the conference and a survey, and then you'll definitely see more on our website, references to some of these regional networks that are already in place, or how you can get tips on how you can start forming them as well. And I bet you'll have a recording of this very webinar right there as well. So it's coming up to now about 5 minutes to 5 o'clock here in Vancouver. We've got time for one or two more questions. And so here we have one from the university side. This is Roxana, and she's at Cal Poly. And she says, we're considering to have a high school counselor advisory group for our international missions. Is it a common practice, and would high school counselors be willing to be involved with the advisory board? So certainly, I think that's probably a lot of folks may have heard of similar advisory boards, maybe taking that a step forward, or actually going to a regional advisory board. Any comments on any of that where you may have seen an advisory board that's really focused regionally?
No, I mean, I haven't seen one regionally, but I've been part of advisory boards at universities, and I found the experience to be wonderful. I mean, it's a really great way to sort of see the inside of that university and how they run their admissions process. So as a counselor, it was certainly enlightening, and I loved the experience. And I'm sure there would be plenty of counselors that would be willing to participate in an activity like that.
It seems to me like it would be difficult, though. You think of my frame of reference compared to Ray's frame of reference in terms of what students, what we might be saying about what our students are seeking or looking for in a university. I could see there'd be quite a variation. And so I was just thinking that through. So if I was on an advisory board, would I be speaking for me as a counselor here, or trying to represent the broader community of counselors? I don't know, just questions I have about it.
To be mindful of that, certainly. So we have close off with one other, maybe a more administrative question. Kevin was asking about listening to all the work that you gentlemen are doing. As you present some of these statistics from neighboring schools to your own high school admin, are you also presenting to your admin all the extra involvement that you're participating in, and how are they taking this extra involvement that you're involved in?
Well, I think they love the extra involvement. They're certainly aware of it, and I think in my case, again, I have a wonderful director who is very supportive. She gets it. She gets all the extra work that's being done, and so it's a wonderful collaboration between myself and the director. But again, I can't speak for the rest of the folks here.
Yeah, I think it's sorry, Dale.
I think it depends how you frame it too. For example, I'm going to show up for work late this morning because it's now 7 a.m. and I'm still not wearing any pants. I think I overshared, but my administration thinks it's great for me to be out representing the British International School of Phuket, because that's helpful to our students. So it depends how you frame it, I think, and convincing your administration that what you're doing is networking with admissions representatives who are going to make decisions on our students' lives, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say is it's really important that we as educators actually live what we're preaching in schools, that we are telling our students in the 21st century they need to collaborate, they need to network, they need to level these kind of schools. So if that's what we're teaching to our students, it's a really powerful example when they can see us doing it ourselves. And any administrators who may have issues with that, I think it'd be quite easy to get the faculty handbook, get educators handbooks out and saying, well, this is what we're telling our teenagers, why aren't we allowed to do it?
And that's great. So I do want to say that to thank you to all those that are participating on this note of giving back and contributing, whether it's through a regional network like this or whether it's through your association, International ACAC. We appreciate all the volunteers, the members that are interested. On this particular note, in fact, we will be, a number of people have submitted applications for committees, and the committee announcements, the new additions to our various committees will be announced in the next week or two. And so if you're on this line today and you weren't successful in that, there are other ways to get involved, and maybe it's being involved in joining in or forming a regional committee or regional organization in your own region, or working with other universities on something similar. So we appreciate that all your work, appreciate your time for being here. This has been a recorded session and will be posted on International ACAC. Stay tuned for, what are we in May right now? June's next webinar, likely looking at, I believe we have a conference preparation for the conference setup next month, which is always a lot of fun. Always send us any comments or any other topics you'd like to hear on International ACAC on our Facebook website. I am on the board, so on behalf of the board, we do appreciate all the feedback that you're giving us. We look forward to seeing many of you at the conference, those that can make it following us online. So this is Aaron Anderson from University of British Columbia, International AC, signing off. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you, and everyone have a great morning, afternoon, or evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.